All right, get ready because we're diving deep into Narnia today. You guys sent over a podcast episode transcript and an article excerpt, both about Greta Gerwig directing the Narnia reboot
Yeah,
for
thanks.
Netflix.
Okay.
Um, the hype is real. Let me tell you, just one detail that jumped out at me right away was that IMAX is getting a 2-week exclusive window for the film before it even goes to Netflix. That's huge.
Especially for a
Wow.
streaming giant like Netflix. I mean, they're really pulling out all the stops to make this reboot special.
It really is fascinating. I think that IMAX deal signals a shift in Netflix's strategy.
Yeah.
You know, they're not just happy with dominating the streaming world. They're aiming for, like, a true theatrical experience to rival traditional studios and choosing IMAX for Narnia, a story that just made for that immersive, larger-than-life presentation. That's a power move.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is a company that built its empire on, binge watching from your couch, and now they're sending audiences to theaters, and not just any theaters, IMAX theaters, which are known for that premium experience.
Yeah.
Seems like they have a lot of faith in this project. Exactly. And I think that faith is fueled by a few factors. First, you've got the Narnia books themselves. Over 115 million copies sold, translated into 57 languages. Huge built-in global fan base. That's a lot of people hungry for a new adaptation, especially after the Disney films. Kind of left the story unfinished.
Yeah, they're serving up a feast for a crowd that's been waiting years for the main course.
Yeah. And to prepare that feast, they brought in Greta Gerwig, which is the
Yeah.
second factor, driving Netflix's confidence. Just think about her trajectory. I mean, she's gone from an indie darling with Lady Bird to capturing the hearts of audiences worldwide with Little Women, and then just completely dominating the cultural conversation with Barbie. This woman knows how to tell stories that resonate.
Yeah.
And she's proven that she can handle intimate character moments, but also big budget spectacles.
Okay. I have to ask, though, is there a risk that Gerwig style, which, some might describe as a little whimsical and sentimental, might clash with the epic, sometimes serious themes of Narnia?
That's a great question, and I'm sure one that Netflix has considered. But you have to remember that Gerwig has shown incredible versatility. I mean, while Barbie definitely had a playful tone, she tackled some really complex issues like gender roles and societal expectations with a lot of nuance and depth. And her adaptation of Little Women really demonstrated her ability to infuse classic literature with fresh perspectives without sacrificing its emotional core.
Yeah, you've got a point. Plus, I think a little whimsy might be exactly what Narnia needs. The previous adaptations, although they were visually impressive, sometimes felt a little stiff.
I see what you mean. This is where Gerwig's signature blend of heart and spectacle could really shine. She has this knack for finding the emotional truth in her stories, and I think she'll bring that same sensitivity to Narnia. Remember that scene in Lady Bird where Saoirse Ronan's character is driving with her mom, and they have that bittersweet argument. It's funny, but it's also heartbreaking. And it really shows Gerwig's ability to capture those complex emotions.
Oh, totally. And think about that. Iconic March of the Wooden Soldiers sequence from Barbie. That combined, the dazzling visuals with that underlying message about female empowerment. Now imagine that kind of creativity applied to the battle scenes in Narnia.
Exactly. And the IMAX format will just amplify those moments. I mean, we're talking epic landscapes, fantastical creatures, maybe even Aslan roaring in all his glory. I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
Me too. But let's not forget about the source material. You mentioned the Disney films left the story unfinished. The article excerpt that you sent highlights that Gerwig has a clean slate to create a multi-film saga that encompasses C.S. Lewis's entire vision.
And that's where things get really interesting. Netflix is hungry for franchises. Just look at the success of Stranger Things and The Witcher, Narnia, with its 7 books, and that rich mythology has the potential to be their next big hit.
Okay, so we've got Netflix betting big on a theatrical release, IMAX upping the ante on the visual experience, and Greta Gerwig, the cinematic darling of the moment, stepping into this beloved fantasy world with this sprawling canvas at her disposal. This is shaping up to be more than just a movie. It's like a strategic play to create the next big fantasy franchise.
Absolutely. And the podcast episode you shared
even
compared this move to what Christopher Nolan and James Cameron have done with IMAX. Creating those event-level films that people feel like they have to see on the biggest screen possible.
And speaking of Gerwig's vision, the podcast also mentioned how she's known for putting a modern spin on classic stories. So how will she approach C.S. Lewis's themes? Will she stay true to the original text, or will she inject a bit of her own contemporary perspective? That's what I'm dying to know.
That's the million-dollar question. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack next. But before we dive into the specifics of Gerwig's potential approach, Let's take a closer look at the source material you provided. I'm particularly interested in a quote from the podcast you sent. The podcast episode you shared quotes a film critic who said, Gerwig's Narnia could be a game changer for how we see fantasy adaptations. What do you make of that statement?
Honestly, it's a bold claim, but I think I see where they're coming from, Most fantasy adaptations, especially those aimed at a family audience, they kind of play it safe, they stick closely to the source material, prioritize spectacle over substance, and rarely challenge the audience to think too deeply.
And that's where Gerwig could really shake things up. She's not afraid to ask tough questions, explore the complexities of human relationships, and challenge those traditional narratives. Remember how she handled the theme of ambition in Little Women, showing both the societal constraints placed on women and their individual desires for fulfillment.
Right. She didn't shy away from the messiness of it all. She showed us that ambition can be a driving force, but also a source of internal conflict, especially for women navigating a world that often tries to limit their choices.
Exactly. Now imagine that same nuanced approach.
Yeah.
Applied to the themes of faith and sacrifice in Narnia. These are concepts that are central to C.S. Lewis's work, but they're also often oversimplified or presented in a very black and white way.
So are you saying that Gerwig might actually delve into the gray areas of faith, explore the doubts, the struggles, the moments where characters question their beliefs?
I think it's definitely a possibility. The article excerpt you sent mentions that Netflix is actually encouraging Gerwig to bring her own unique perspective to the project. They're not just looking for a rehash of the old Narnia films. They want something fresh, something that will resonate with a modern audience.
Which makes me wonder, how will she handle the religious allegory that's so deeply woven into the Narnia books? Aslan is a Christ figure, the White Witch representing temptation, that whole idea of redemption through sacrifice. Those are all pretty heavy themes, especially for a film that's likely to be marketed to a wide audience.
That's a really important point, and one that I'm sure Gerwig is wrestling with. It's a delicate balance. If she leans too heavily into the religious aspect, she risks alienating viewers who don't share those beliefs, or who simply prefer their fantasy films to be a bit more secular. But if she ignores it completely, she could disappoint those who appreciate that layer of the story and who see it as integral to Narnia's message.
It's a tightrope walk for sure. But maybe there's a way to approach those themes in a way that's both respectful of the source material and accessible to a wider audience.
I think so too. Gerwig has shown this remarkable ability to find the universal truths within specific stories. In Lady Bird, for example, she explored the complexities of the mother-daughter relationship, something that resonates with people from all walks of life, regardless of their religious beliefs.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could work. She could focus on the emotional and psychological aspects of faith, the struggle for meaning and purpose, the choices we make in the face of difficult circumstances. Those are themes that everyone can relate to, whether they're religious or not.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And by tapping into those universal truths, she could make Narnia even more powerful and resonant than it already is.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But let's be real for a second. The previous Narnia films, while they had their moments, didn't exactly set the box office on fire, They were visually impressive, but some critics found them a bit preachy and lacking in emotional depth.
I agree. And that's where Gerwig's unique approach could make all the difference. She's not just interested in spectacle, she's interested in the human heart. She wants to understand what makes people tick, what motivates them, what they believe in, and why. And I think she'll bring that same curiosity and empathy to Narnia.
You're right. And think about the impact her films have had on audiences. Lady Bird sparked conversations about growing up and finding your voice. Little Women made us rethink gender roles and the power of sisterhood. And Barbie, well, it's practically a cultural phenomenon, prompting discussions about everything, from feminism to consumerism to the meaning of life itself.
Exactly. Gerwig's films have a way of staying with you long after the credits roll. They spark conversations, challenge assumptions, and make you see the world in a new light.
And isn't that what great storytelling is all about? Making us think, feel, and connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And I have a feeling that Gerwig's Narnia will do just that.
Yep.
It'll be visually stunning, yes, but it'll also be emotionally resonant, thought-provoking, and perhaps even a little bit subversive.
Okay, you've officially sold me. I am now fully on board the Gerwig Narnia hype train. But there's one thing I can't stop thinking about. Aslan. He's such a central figure in this story, a symbol of strength, wisdom, and compassion. How do you think Gerwig will approach him? Will he be CGI? Will they use a real lion? And most importantly, will he capture that same sense of awe and wonder that he evokes in the books?
Those are great questions, and ones that I'm sure the filmmakers are grappling with right now. You know, Aslan is more than just a talking lion. He's the heart and soul of Narnia. He represents something bigger than himself, a force of good that guides and protects the Pevensey children and helps them discover their true potential.
He's also a bit of a mystery, right? He's powerful.
Yeah,
But he's not always present. He intervenes when necessary. But he also allows the characters to make their own choices and face their own challenges. He's not a typical hero figure, which makes him all the more fascinating.
exactly. And that complexity is what makes Aslan such a challenge to portray on screen. He can't be too anthropomorphic. He needs to retain his animal nature, his wildness, his otherworldliness, but he also needs to be relatable, someone the audience can connect with emotionally.
So how do you strike that balance? CGI seems like the most likely option. Given the technological advancements we've seen in recent years, I mean, they could create a truly majestic Aslan that's both realistic and expressive.
I agree. CGI offers a lot of creative freedom, and it allows them to capture Aslan's movements and mannerisms in a way that would be impossible with a real lion. But there's also something to be said for the authenticity of a live animal on screen. Remember the tiger in Life of Pi? That film wouldn't have been nearly as powerful without the presence of a real tiger, with all its raw energy and unpredictability.
That's a great point. But using a real lion would present a whole host of challenges, not to mention ethical concerns about animal welfare.
Absolutely. It would be a logistical nightmare, and I'm not sure the payoff would justify the risks. Plus, we need to consider the actor's safety. I can't imagine anyone wanting to share a scene with a real lion, no matter how well trained it is.
So it seems like CGI is the most sensible option. But even with CGI, they need to get Aslan right. He's such an iconic character, and his presence looms large over the entire Narnia saga.
You're right. And it's not just about the visuals, it's about the voice, the personality, the essence of who Aslan is.
Speaking of voices, who do you think they'll cast to voice Aslan? The podcast mentioned Liam Neeson have voiced him in the Disney films, but I'm not sure if they'll go that route again.
I doubt it. It feels like they're aiming for a fresh start with this reboot, and that includes finding a new voice for Aslan. You know, it needs to be someone who can convey both his authority and his warmth, his power and his gentleness.
Ooh, that's a tall order. Someone with gravitas. But also a touch of vulnerability, maybe someone like Idris Elba. Or Chiwetel Ejiofor.
Those are excellent choices. Both have the range and presence to pull it off. Or maybe they'll go for a complete wild card, someone we wouldn't expect at all. That could be really interesting.
You know, thinking about the voice casting for Aslan got me thinking about the Pevensey children. Finding the right actors for those roles will be crucial. They need to be believable as both ordinary children and as the future kings and queens of Narnia.
You're absolutely right. The Pevenseys are our entry point into Narnia, and we need to connect with them emotionally in order to fully experience the magic of the story.
And each sibling has their own distinct personality and arc. Peter, the eldest, has to learn leadership and responsibility. Susan has to balance her practicality with her sense of wonder. Edmund struggles with temptation and betrayal before finding redemption. And Lucy, with her unwavering faith and belief in the impossible, is the heart and soul of the group.
They're such rich, well-developed characters. And casting those roles will be a huge undertaking. They'll need to find young actors who can convey both the vulnerability and the strength of these children as they navigate a world that's both wondrous and dangerous.
It's almost like they're casting 4 different films within one film,
Yeah.
given the depth of each character.
You're exactly right. And it'll be fascinating to see how Gerwig directs these young actors. You know, she's known for getting incredible performances out of her cast, no matter their age or experience.
I can already imagine her working with them on set, creating a collaborative and nurturing environment where they feel comfortable exploring their characters and bringing their own unique perspectives to the story.
And I'm sure she'll encourage them to have fun with it. You know, Narnia at its core is a story about the power of imagination. And I think she'll want to capture that sense of childlike wonder and playfulness in her adaptation.
Okay, so we've got a visionary director, a beloved source material, a studio willing to take risks, and a potential cast that's starting to take shape in my mind. I'm getting seriously excited about this project.
Me too. And remember, we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more to explore, from the specific stories Gerwig might choose to adapt to the visual style and tone of the film.
But before we get too carried away with speculation, let's bring it back to the sources you provided. The article excerpt you sent mentions something about Gerwig's approach to adapting classic literature. It says she's not afraid to shake things up and challenge expectations.
That's an interesting point. I think it's safe to say that Gerwig won't be creating like a slavishly faithful adaptation of the Narnia books. She'll bring her own unique sensibilities to the story, just as she did with Little Women.
Which is what makes this project so exciting. We know she'll be respectful of the source material, but she'll also find ways to make it her own, to inject it with her own voice and vision.
Exactly. And that's what I'm most looking forward to, seeing how she balances faithfulness to the original text with her own creative impulses. It's a delicate dance, but I have a feeling she'll pull it off brilliantly.
You know, as we've been talking about all the different aspects of Gerwig's Narnia, one thing keeps coming back to me: the wardrobe. It's such an iconic image. The portal between the ordinary world and the magical realm.
Yes, the wardrobe, the gateway to adventure, the symbol of transformation. It's hard to imagine a Narnia adaptation without it.
Exactly. But I wonder how Gerwig will interpret it. Will it be a literal wardrobe, like in the books and previous films? Or will she find a more metaphorical way to represent that transition between worlds?
That's a great question. And it speaks to her overall approach to adaptation. Will she embrace the classic imagery? Or will she find a more subtle, nuanced way to convey the same ideas?
Thinking about the wardrobe and how Gerwig might reinterpret it made me think about the overall visual style of the film. What kind of aesthetic do you think she'll go for?
That's a fascinating question. I think she'll strike a balance between realism and fantasy. She'll want Narnia to feel like a real place with its own unique flora and fauna. But she'll also want to capture the magic and wonder that's so essential to the story.
The article excerpt you sent mentions that she's a fan of practical effects, which is interesting. It suggests she might shy away from excessive CGI and instead opt for more tangible, grounded visuals.
I think that's a smart move. Practical effects can add a level of realism and texture that CGI sometimes lacks.
I'm getting a clearer picture in my mind now. I imagine sweeping shots of Narnia's landscapes, perhaps filmed on location, in some breathtaking natural setting. The creatures, well, fantastical, will have a certain groundedness to them, a sense of weight and physicality, and the costumes. Oh, the costumes. I can already envision Gerwig collaborating with some brilliant costume designer to create outfits that are both historically inspired and whimsically imaginative.
I can see it too. And don't forget the music. Gerwig has a knack for choosing soundtracks that perfectly complement the mood and tone of her films. I wouldn't be surprised if she went with a mix of orchestral scores and folk-inspired melodies, something that evokes both the grandeur and the intimacy of Narnia.
Ooh, that's a great point. Music is so crucial to creating atmosphere and emotional depth. And speaking of emotional depth, I'm curious to see how Gerwig will handle the Pevensie children's emotional journeys. They're not just going on a physical adventure, they're also going through profound internal transformations.
Absolutely. They're coming of age in a world that's both wondrous and terrifying, and they're forced to confront their own fears, weaknesses, and prejudices.
I'm especially intrigued by Edmund's arc. He's the character who makes the most mistakes, who succumbs to temptation and betrays his siblings, but he also finds redemption and ultimately becomes a wiser and more compassionate person.
His story is a powerful reminder that even those who make mistakes can change and grow, and it's a testament to the power of forgiveness and second chances.
Thinking about Edmund's arc and the theme of redemption made me realize something. Gerwig's Narnia might be darker than we expect. She's not afraid to explore the complexities of human nature. And I wouldn't be surprised if she delves into the shadows alongside the light.
I agree. I think she'll embrace the full spectrum of emotions, from joy and wonder to fear and grief. Narnia, after all, is a world where good and evil are constantly at war, and the stakes are incredibly high.
That makes me wonder, how will she handle the White Witch? She's such a formidable villain, and her presence casts a long shadow over Narnia.
That's a great question. The White Witch is a fascinating character, a complex blend of power, beauty, and cruelty. She represents the seductive allure of darkness, the temptation to choose self-preservation over sacrifice.
And in the books, she's pretty terrifying. She turns her enemies into stone, manipulates people with Turkish delight, and tries to rule Narnia with an iron fist.
Exactly. She's a force to be reckoned with. And casting that role will be crucial. They'll need to find an actress who can convey both her seductive charm and her chilling ruthlessness.
Ooh, imagine someone like Tilda Swinton. She'd be perfect for the role. She has that ethereal, otherworldly quality that's both captivating and unsettling.
That's a brilliant suggestion. Or maybe they'll go with a younger actress, someone who can embody the White Witch's vanity, an obsession with youth. Either way, it'll be a role that steals every scene.
As we've been talking about the White Witch and her role as the antagonist, it's made me realize something important. Narnia, at its heart, is a story about the battle between good and evil. But it's also about the choices we make, the people we become, and the sacrifices we're willing to make for something greater than ourselves.
Beautifully said. And I think that's what Gerwig will capture in her adaptation. And she'll show us the epic battles, the magical creatures, the breathtaking landscapes. But she'll also remind us that the real magic lies in the human heart, in our capacity for courage, compassion, and love.
Okay, you've officially reignited my childhood obsession with Narnia. I'm so ready for this film. But I have a feeling it's going to be a long wait.
You're probably right. These kinds of big-budget fantasy films take time to make. We're talking about intricate sets, elaborate costumes, CGI creatures, and a whole lot of post-production magic.
But you know what? The wait will only make it that much sweeter. The anticipation will build, the rumors will fly, and when the film finally arrives, it'll be an event.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling it'll be worth the wait. You know, Gerwig has a way of exceeding expectations, of surprising us with her creativity and insight.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about Gerwig's vision, the challenges of adapting Narnia, the potential cast, the visual style, the emotional themes, and even the iconic wardrobe. Is there anything else we need to consider before we wrap up this deep dive?
I think we've hit all the major points, but I would add one more thought. While we've been speculating about Gerwig's approach and all the possibilities this project holds, we also need to remember that it's ultimately her story to tell.
You're right, we can analyze, we can predict, we can get excited, but in the end, it's up to Gerwig to bring her own unique vision to life.
And I, for one, can't wait to see what she creates.
Me too. It feels like a new era for Narnia is dawning. I have a feeling it's going to be magical. You know, as we've been breaking down all these elements from the wardrobe to the White Witch, I keep coming back to something you mentioned earlier, that Gerwig's Narnia could be a game changer for how we see fantasy adaptations. What exactly does that mean for you as someone who really loves these kinds of stories?
That's a great question. I think for me, it boils down to a shift in perspective. For so long, fantasy films have been seen as just pure escapism, like a way to transport ourselves to other worlds. Forget about our own troubles.
So it's not about choosing between escapism or our depth. She's blending them together.
Exactly. Like, look at Pan's Labyrinth. It's a visually stunning fantasy film, set against the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War. But it also tackles themes of loss, courage, and the power of imagination in the face of adversity. And Carisi, who directed that film, Guillermo del Toro, another filmmaker who's known for that blend of fantasy and realism.
Oh, I see the connection. So Gerwig's Narnia might not just be about escaping into a magical world. It might also be about finding the magic within ourselves, you know, the strength to face our own challenges, and the hope that even in the darkest times, good can prevail.
Exactly, and I think that's a message that will really resonate with audiences, especially today, when we're facing so many, complex issues and uncertainties.
You just reminded me of something the podcast episode mentioned, that the producers are looking at this Narnia reboot as a potential franchise starter, much like Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings. Do you think Gerwig's vision, even with its potential for darker themes, can still work within that franchise framework?
That's a really interesting point. It's a question I'm sure the studio executives are asking themselves as well. Franchises, by their very nature, they rely on a certain formula, that balance of action, humor, and heart that appeals to a broad audience.
So how do you reconcile Gerwig's unique style, which can be quite introspective, and character-driven, with the demands of a big-budget franchise?
It's a delicate balancing act, but I think it's possible. Remember, Gerwig has shown that she can handle large-scale productions. Barbie wasn't exactly a small indie film, and it was both commercially successful and critically acclaimed.
True, and it proves she can appeal to a wide audience without sacrificing her artistic vision.
Right, and I think the key is finding a way to weave those deeper themes and character arcs into the fabric of the franchise itself, make them an integral part of the overall story.
So it's not about creating standalone films, it's about creating a cohesive world, where those themes can evolve and deepen over multiple films.
Yes. Think about the Harry Potter films. They started out as relatively lighthearted adventures. But as the characters got older, the stories became more complex, darker, and more emotionally resonant. And those later films are often considered the most powerful and impactful of the series.
So Gerwig's Narnia could follow a similar path, starting with a more whimsical and accessible tone, but gradually introducing those deeper themes and complexities as the franchise grows.
Yeah, and that would allow her to appeal to both younger viewers who who are just discovering Narnia, but also older viewers who are looking for something a bit more substantial.
Wow, that's really exciting. It's like she's creating a world that can grow and evolve along with its audience.
That's the beauty of a well-crafted franchise. It can stay with us for years, even decades, as we revisit those stories and discover new layers of meaning each time.
Okay, I'm sold on this multi-film Narnia saga, but before we get too lost in the future, let's bring it back to the present. We've talked about all these possibilities, but what can we realistically expect? From Gerwig's Narnia, what are you most excited to see?
That's a tough one. I think, first and foremost, I'm really excited to see how her unique visual style is applied to the world of Narnia. I mean, she has a knack for creating images that are both beautiful and evocative, and I'm just eager to see how she captures the magic and wonder of C.S. Lewis's creation.
The podcast transcript even mentioned that she's a big fan of using color palettes to create mood and atmosphere. What kind of color scheme do you imagine for Narnia?
That's interesting. I imagine a mix of vibrant hues and earthy tones. You know, the forests of Narnia, lush and verdant. The sky is a brilliant blue. But there's also that sense of darkness and mystery lurking beneath the surface, maybe reflected in the shadows of the trees or the deep blues of the twilight sky.
I love that. It sounds both enchanting and a bit ominous, which seems fitting for a world where good and evil are constantly clashing.
Right, and I think Gerwig will use color and light to create a sense of depth and complexity, to hint at the hidden layers beneath the surface of this magical world.
Okay, so we've got stunning visuals, a potentially franchise-worthy storyline, and a director who's not afraid to push boundaries. Anything else on your Narnia wish list?
Well, I'm also really hoping for a soundtrack that's both epic and emotionally resonant. You know, music can play such a powerful role in fantasy films. And I really trust Gerwig to choose music that enhances the storytelling and creates a truly immersive experience.
Yeah. A great soundtrack can just transport you to another world. I think Gerwig will deliver. I'm already picturing those sweeping orchestral scores as the Pevensies first stepped into Narnia, and maybe some haunting melodies during the White Witch's scene.
Oh, yeah. And maybe even some folk-inspired tunes to capture the whimsy and charm of the Narnian creature.
Yes, like a faun playing a flute in the forest, or a band of dwarves singing a drinking song.
Exactly. Those little details can really bring a world to life.
As we wrap up, is there anything else listeners should keep in mind as they await this film?
I think the most important thing is to go into this experience with an open mind. You know, Gerwig's Narnia will probably be different from anything we've seen before. It'll be familiar, but it will also be infused with her unique vision and style.
So embrace the unexpected, be open to new interpretations, and trust that Gerwig will honor the spirit of Narnia while also making it her own.
Yes, and most importantly, remember the power of imagination. Narnia is a world where anything is possible, where dreams can come true, and where the battle between good and evil is waged not just with swords and sorcery, but with the choices we make and the stories we tell.
Well said. I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Greta Gerwig's Narnia. We've explored the source material, analyzed the director's vision, and speculated. Now all that's left is to wait for the magic to unfold on screen. Until then, keep those imaginations running wild. And remember, adventure is always just around the corner, waiting to be discovered.